So latest data indicates that South Africa remains the most targeted country on the continent, at least when it comes to ransomware and business email compromise incidents. The country is inundated with cyber attacks, some say, and the last couple of years were the worst on record. More than a half of South African firms were reportedly impacted by ransomware in the past year. For more on this, let's speak to Toby Shapshak, a tech expert. Toby, a very good evening to you. Welcome to News at Prime. So are things as bad as we're hearing as far as ransomware attacks in this country?
I'm sorry to say they are, and they are probably worse because, like all crimes, most of them go unreported. And a lot of people do not admit that they were foolish enough to get caught doing something really silly. And this is really what comes down to ransomware. Ransomware exploits people who haven't done the updates to their software. It's really that simple. So if you don't do the various security updates to your software, if you run Windows or if you run cloud-based server software, that is how ransomware or cyber criminals insert ransomware into your system. And that's really what happens. So it is negligence on the part of the people who are caught in the ransomware scare, because the other thing any business should be doing is backing up its data, fanatically, insanely, paranoidly backing up your data all the time in real time, so that if someone does manage to get into your system and does manage to lock you down, your data is secure. You just shut down the instance of your software and you start something new. And I'm horrified to see how many companies get caught in this position where they do not get their backups and their updates in proper operation, and then as a result are caught in ransomware. And it's become significant because South Africa's information regulator has just flexed its muscle and fined none other than the Department of Justice 5 million rand for failing to apply this kind of methodology and allowing data to be stolen under PAPIA, the Protection of Personal Information Act, which is probably one of the best pieces of legislation in South Africa ever.
Interesting to me, though, Toby, that there is the legislation where everyone now knows that if you are responsible for the handling of anyone's personal data, for example, you are now obligated by law to do your best to protect that information. But in terms of ransomware, even globally, there have been so many big stories, especially in the last, decade and a half to a decade, that you would think that the major companies would have caught on by now as far as the importance of having their ducks in a row.
You'd think, right? Like, the examples are extraordinary. I'm going to forget some of the big names, but the British NHI, Johnson & Johnson, some of the biggest names in the world, listed companies, were caught in a variety of ransomware attacks, not in the last just decade, but in the last 2 years. It's been astounding how often this form of malware, malicious software, has been inserted into the system and people have been caught. And of course, it shows two things. One, you're not backing up your data, and two, that you're not updating your software, because if you updated your software, you would overcome the problem that allows you to get caught in that instance. And South Africa is not alone, you rightly say, but it is more relevant when it's our data being stolen. And I feel like I'm some kind of deranged person going on and on and on about how important your personal data was. I also used to go on and on and on about how important it was to wash your hands. Then COVID happened and ransomware happened, and now I don't seem so deranged anymore. But the more paranoid you are about your personal data and how you keep it safe, the better you are. I mean, I am just astounded at how many South Africans will drive into a complex, into a gated community or into a block of a business address and glibly hand over their ID for someone to scan. Where is the PAPIA form that you fill in that says you will collect my data for X purposes, you won't use it for any other purposes, and then you will delete it when it's no longer relevant to you? South Africans just hand over their information every time they drive into a gate. It's completely illegal in terms of the PAPIA legislation, the Poppy Act, Popia, and people continue to do it, and landlords continue to do it, and nobody except me refuses to hand over their driver's license when they drive into someone else's property, because if you're collecting personal data, you have to do it within the rights and terms of the Popia Act, and if you don't, it is illegal.
But isn't that
it's
the average
astounding?
The average South African, then, Toby, perhaps is not aware of the laws around it,
Yes.
and the fact that you can.
Well, it's because they don't watch enough Newzroom Afrika.
I mean, clearly that's a problem, right?
.co.za. Clearly, they just don't watch enough of you or me.
But how then do we change that to get people at the most basic level to understand the importance of sensitivity and security around our own information and the information of others that may come into our possession for whatever reason, especially in the workplace?
I mean, this is part, and it's a very good question, because we now live in an age where no one values that anymore. And the person we have to thank more than anyone else is Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, or Meta as they now call it, was the person who said the mores of privacy, the understanding of how we are about our personal data and our privacy is changing, and yet he's the person more than anyone else who pushed those changes onto us through Facebook, through Instagram, through WhatsApp, and now through Threads, which I hear has fallen through the floor and has less followers than, Zuckerberg himself on Twitter. But the problem is we are so used to just giving this information away. I am astounded at how many people say, please send me a WhatsApp of your ID, and I go, absolutely not. Are you out of your mind? And yet, I booked into an Airbnb. I wrote an article about this for the Daily Maverick. I booked into an Airbnb. They demanded a copy of my ID. I said, no, I refused to in terms of Popia. And yet there was a guy standing the security guy standing in this building in Cape Town, scrolling through WhatsApp without a password on this phone, with maybe 10 people's IDs that I saw. I don't know how many more, in WhatsApp of a phone used by multiple people at a security desk without a password on it. I mean, that is just illegal in terms of Popia, and yet people are now completely willing to just send that personal information via an insecure channel. Let me tell you, email is not secure. Someone says to you, send me a copy of your password or ID via email, they are immediately breaking Popia. And this is the problem. It's just people are so willing to give this personal information away because we have been inculcated in this crime ourselves by Facebook and Google, by thinking our personal data has information, has value, when actually that information only has value to Google and Facebook and criminals who are trying to steal it. There's a reason Facebook and Google are called surveillance capitalism. They ask us for free information to give us free services. The amount of information we give them completely outweighs the amount of services they give us. We give them way more value than they give us, and yet they keep trying to convince us, Facebook, Google, and every other social media network that thinks surveillance capitalism is a meaningful way to change the world. They keep saying that this will, this is for our own good. No, it isn't. It's for their good. They're the ones who make money from us. So please be paranoid. Don't give your ID to anyone when you drive into a complex of any kind, whether it's a townhouse complex or business complex. They have not asked you to sign Popia forms and information to use your data. Therefore, you don't have to hand over your data to them. Let's start a movement at 1840 on a Saturday night.
Shall we call it the Shap Shack Revolution? Quick final
If only that involved the Springboks winning the World Cup, yes.
You're not in the right colors, though. Quick final one then, Toby. Let's talk about, the personal information. We joke now, but the personal information that you're warning us not to hand out all willy-nilly is the information that ransomware syndicates then take and then basically try to get money, right, out of companies or whoever. How targeted are those attacks? How do they know which companies, which entities to strike?
It's unbelievably targeted. So last year there were a couple of very significant ransomware attacks. I forget which of the data agencies had this information, but one of them had Cyril Ramaphosa's information and Julius Malema's information. I think, just going to think off the top of my head, I don't want to defame someone, but we ran a story about it in the Financial Mail about how one of the reporters was approached by the people who had the data and started speaking to her and saying, you did this, and this is when you used your credit card, and this and that. And I mean, that's highly, highly personal. And we've seen this. There's all you have to do is just, I mean, I don't use Google anymore. So if you just have to Bing it, or open AI it, they will tell you how many of these various companies have been so appalling at collecting information and then handing it out. There was a company last year that gave all of the information to someone who claimed he was a bona fide user of the information, and yet he was a spammer. So even though they went through all the checks and balances and this guy paid for the information, they handed it over. I mean, there are innumerable stories you can bring these to about how U.S. security agencies like the NSA and the CIA are buying the information about U.S. citizens from these surveillance capitalist companies. They're not bothering to, snoop on people. They're just buying the data that's readily available. I mean, this is an example for you of just how dangerous this kind of surveillance capitalism is. The CIA uses ad blockers so that programmatic advertising does not appear on their staff's computers because it's that intrusive. The CIA doesn't let programmatic advertising on their computers. I mean, that gives you pause, right? You should stop doing that immediately. Google and Facebook are the most evil companies in the world. As much as we blame big oil for all of the problems we have in the environment, Google and Facebook will go down in history as the most evil companies for how they have just intruded on our privacy and used our privacy to make themselves immensely rich at our expense.
Toby Shapshak, tech expert. Good to speak to you as always, Toby. Thank you for your time tonight.